distinguished delegates, dear participants, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the second day of the International Forum on Low Carbon Cities. I'm Qian Chun, Associate Environmental Affairs Officer of UNESCAP East and Northeast Station Office, and I'm your MC for the event today. I would like to announce several housekeeping messages before we start. So please, first of all, mute yourself, and also don't forget to unmute yourself when you speak. The forum provides simultaneous interpretation in 5 languages: English, Chinese, Mongolian, Korean, and Russian. So please choose the channel from the interpretation feature in your Zoom window and make sure you stick to the language of your choice throughout the sessions. And lastly, we ask you to direct your questions to a specific presenter or panelist, or try your best to do so in the Q&A box. If time allows, the moderator will open the floor for general discussion, in which case, please use the hand-raising sign to make an intervention or ask a question. Now let's get started. We're starting off with a very exciting discussion on green financing for low-carbon cities. I would like to introduce the moderator of Session 4, Mr. Michael Linfield, Senior Consultant with the Green Climate Fund. Mr. Linfield, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I'm very appreciative to have been asked to moderate this session. Thank you very much to ESCAP and the other organizations that are involved in the activity today. I'm going to try and move quite quickly, and I would like all of the participants and the speakers to keep their presentations to about a maximum of 15 minutes, so that we still have time for the question and answer session at the end. I'm going to try and restrict my presentation to just 10 minutes so that we get more time during the activity on the Q&A. And just to quickly introduce, we have a really good set of panelists today who have extensive experience in the financing area. I'll introduce them one by one as we come to them in terms of the presentation title, but we have Ms. Tiza Mithara, the Director of the Climate Policy Institute, Mr. Drazen Kusin of the Senior Urban and Energy Efficiency Specialist at GCF. We have Mr. Ding Wei Huang, the Deputy Financial Affairs Officer of Huzhou Municipal Government. And finally, but by no means least, we have Mr. Arno Heckman, a friend of mine for a very long time from the Asian Development Bank, who is the Principal Urban Development Specialist in the Mongolia Resident Mission. I'll call on the presenters and introduce their titles, the title of their presentation as we go. First, I'll just give a very quick overview of the context as GCF sees it. I have been working with the GCF and particularly Mr. Drazen Kusin on this sort of area of green cities and green financing for cities. And I think it's really important that we kind of set the scene and before we dive into the actual practice. So if we could share my slides. Great, thank you. Next. Okay. So I don't think we need to go into the rationale for action in urban areas on climate. I think that we've actually I'm sure the rest of the presentations have been focused on this activity, but just to say there is a huge importance to make effective investments in the sector, and financing is critical to that. When we say financing, in this presentation, I'm going to focus more on the Green Climate Fund's perspective. And it has to be remembered that the GCF always works through its accredited entities. And so the issue for the GCF is to identify critical investments that can be upscaled so that there will be a major impact on either climate mitigation or adaptation. And so also in this presentation, I'm going to present the city's perspective. There are other core areas of investment under GCF that are relevant to cities, particularly in energy and transport, which I will not go into a huge amount of detail on today. Next. Okay. Also, while it's a low carbon cities activity, we have to remember that there is a huge amount of problems in that a lot of Asian cities in particular, but all throughout the world, are very vulnerable to climate impacts. And engaging in mitigation activities without thinking about the resilience of the investments that you make, it can lead to disaster. Next. So we're looking at major potential problems from climate risk. At least 77 million poor people are at increasing risk, and there's going to be a cost of billions worldwide by 2030. Next. But there are major problems in capacity in terms of addressing and putting these interventions in place. There's issues of government capacity, and particularly around the regulatory systems that put in place the enabling framework for financing. There's a lack of private sector confidence in terms of being able to mobilize investment due to issues with foreign exchange risk and limited investor confidence in the institutions. There's challenges in project preparation. There's a lot of upfront costs to prepare projects, and there's financing challenges for subnational governments. There's a lack of creditworthiness in many cases. Next. There we go. However, what I wanted to focus on in particular is that while cities have, and of course, one of the major roles in generating greenhouse gases, they are a huge potential because they are actually 80% of the GDP. So while they're big emitters, they are also the repositories of the wealth necessary to undertake the investments that are required. Next. So in terms of the financing that's needed, we can see that the OECD estimates of 6.9 trillion. The World Bank has 40 billion per year. And in terms of resilience and that it's also the Coalition for Urban Transition is saying that there is 5 to 6 trillion a year to meet human and economic development needs over the coming decades, which is huge. And at the moment, there is an infrastructure investment gap of at least $1 trillion a year. Next. So in terms of the megacities, we can see that in particular, the megacities are huge amounts of the percentages of national GDP. If we can mobilize the resources that are available within cities and channel those resources to the needed mitigation and adaptation actions, then we are in a potential situation where we might be able to afford it in addition to the international transfers. But we are often run up in many developing country cities to the fact that there is a very high level of informality in the city. This makes a problem in terms of being able to put together the financing required. Next. So different approaches are needed to megacities, secondary cities, and in terms of access to financing, we've got to look at different ways of doing that, and I'm going to go into more detail on that in a minute. Next. As far as the GCF is concerned, we've identified four major paradigm shifting pathways that we feel are important in terms of the investment. There's the decarbonisation of energy systems, there's energy efficiency in building stocks, there are compact and resilient cities, and there's the circular urban economy. Those those four areas are going to be the focus of the cities program of the GCF. As I say, in energy generation and transport and some other areas, there are other GCF policies coming forward that will address aspects of some urban development. Next. So I won't be going through these, but I think that the critical things are the drivers for these paradigm shifts. Drazen will go into this in more detail. We need to look at planning and programming for climate investments. We need to look at catalyzing innovation in investment. We need to look at the mobilization of finance at scale. How do you get programmatic approaches to actually impact these four paradigm shifting pathways? And lastly, we need to look at expansion and replication of knowledge. Next. Now, next, sorry, could you click on it? Where there's the, on the right-hand side of the slide, there are things missing. One more click. That's it, thank you. So in terms of the city financing, as you can see, there's a wiring diagram here of the kinds of different sources of financing that are available to cities. I'm not going to go through this line by line, but the critical areas that the GCF needs to think about is mobilizing institutional financing, coordinating donor focus, encouraging leveraging of institutional finance, strengthening enabling frameworks for investments, expanding the range and capacity of the accredited entities, the direct access entities, support to cities and city institutions, and support to private sector financing. So you can see there are necessary interventions at very many stages of the city financing process. Next. In terms of the impact areas that GCF would like to see, we're looking at paradigm sort of shifting path dependencies to make sure that the trajectories of high emissions and low resilience are broken, particularly in the LDCs and SIDS. There's a need to reduce emissions and increase resilience in the megacities, and there's a need to look at decentralized finance. There are many different ways that we need to implement that. There needs to be a focus on the country context and policy tools. We need to look at retrofitting of cities. There is the issue, people say, 50% of the urban areas will be built in the next 50 years. Yes, but 50% are already built. We need to think of ways of decarbonizing and retrofitting existing cities as well. We need to look at subnational financing mechanisms. And last, in that respect, last slide, we're looking at, in terms of financing through GCF and the cities agenda through 2020 and under the GCF2 refinancing, the critical areas are programmatic financing to upscale the impact and scope for interventions. We need to partner with the AEs to build capacity to generate quality project pipelines. We need to look at use of multi-sectoral and sometimes multi-country facilities. We need to look at leveraging the private sector. It is important that the accredited entities look not just at government means of implementation, but also the private sector. We need to structure according to private to the way that private and institutional funds can actually access these investments. We need to deploy financing structures that mobilize new sources of capital. There are exciting kind of new developments in carbon markets and guarantee facilities. We need to look at ways that they can be included into the financing structures. In terms of subnational finance, there needs to be more focus on the direct access entities, both public and private. And building climate project development, structuring and implementation support is really important within those entities. And finally, effective partnerships. GCF can't do anything, sorry, can't do everything. And there are many, many areas where other development partners and international financing institutions and the private sector can play a huge role. And also, there needs to be a coordination of resource deployment, and there needs to be much more sharing of financing and knowledge. So that was a quick run through, and we'll go on to the next speaker. Thank you very much. Okay. Right, now I would like to introduce the first speaker, presenting on fund mobilization for urban climate action, and Ms. Tiza Mifara, the Associate Director of the Climate Policy Institute. Could you please take the floor? Thanks.
Hi, Michael. Thank you very much for setting the tone for the discussion today. And thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I have been tasked today to deliver my thoughts on enabling climate finance for cities, for urban cities. And I think this is a very challenging topic because, as we all know, climate finance needs are hefty, and we're not nearing the target that we need to reach just yet. So there has to be a lot more of a concerted effort and a collaborative effort to come together to figure out how to close the gaps in finance. So I'll be talking about that. Let's see. Bear with me as I figure out technology. Okay, so the reason why it's so important to talk about cities is because cities are critical to climate action. Cities are ready to act, but need to unlock the finance to do so. And at the moment, urban areas are in need of transition. Approximately 75% of global CO2 emissions originate from urban areas. Cities are also the most vulnerable, are at risk of rising sea levels. By 2050, around 1 billion urban dwellers are projected to face significant increase from sea level rise. Now, urbanization will also continue to increase. That trend is not stagnating. And 90% of global population growth is estimated to be in cities in the global south, which are less prepared to deal with climate risk. Cities are ready to act, actually. Over 6,000 cities have already developed climate action plans around the world, representing 20% of urban residents globally. And many of the solutions to the climate crisis already exist. With today's technologies, with the available measures, greenhouse gas emissions in cities can be reduced by almost 90% by 2050 and support jobs as well. However, if we go to the next slide, the needs for city level climate action is about $5 trillion US. But at the moment, only $384 billion is flowing to city level climate action. So this is far short of the needs. And we have to figure out a way to close this gap. Next slide. I'll explain that Sankey chart in a minute. But one of the primary, I think, efforts and one of what I believe passionately to be a key in moving forward is to collaborate and to strengthen, to make information available, accessible, and symmetrical as much as possible as to where the project that needs financing are, what are the opportunities, and where the financing can come from. So since 2019, Climate Policy Initiative has held the Secretariat for the City's Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, which allows us to focus more on cities. And this alliance serves as the multi-level, multi-stakeholder coalition. It's aimed at closing the investment gap for urban and subnational climate projects and infrastructure worldwide. At the moment, our members include more than 60 public and private financial institutions and governments, international organizations, NGOs, research groups, city networks, representing the world's largest cities. Now, and the alliance members contribute their expertise and their networks and their access to funding to bridge the supply and demand for resilient development at the city level. Next slide. And we have, over the course of, well, since 2019, published a lot of knowledge products with specific themes and focuses. Some of them are thematic, focusing on adaptation, which the importance of which I'll explain later. Some of them are focusing on National Development Bank potential role in scaling up finance. Some of them are a deep dive into specific cities. So one of them is Jakarta, assessing Jakarta's climate investments. Jakarta is where I'm based. And then there's one on 2 Indian cities and Mexico. And all of these are readily accessible knowledge products. Next. But one knowledge product that I wanted to focus on today is a report on the state of cities climate finance, which is a global overview of climate finance flows. Next. It talks about the landscape of urban climate finance, as well as what are the enabling conditions that would be required to scale finance up. And this Sankey chart basically is, it represents a life cycle of annual investment flows to cities, averaged over the period of 2017 and 2018. And there's a few interesting things that I'd like to highlight out of this curly Sankey chart. In terms of the sources of investment, so if you look to the left, where the funding starts from or originates from, that's the source of investment. And you'll see the difference between blue and orange. Blue would be public sources and orange would be private sources. That is a roughly 60-40 split. So 40% being public sources, blue, 60% being private sources. And financing from national governments was the highest single contributing finance provider, driven by spending on urban transport and buildings, but domestic private finance was the main source of capital overall. Now, if you move to the right, very, very right, and we look at what urban climate finance is currently being spent on, you'll see large sums spent on mitigation in buildings and transport. And the largest sums of adaptation finance is on water management. But overall, you can see there's a clear divide between adaptation and mitigation finance. So finance for adaptation projects represents only 9% of investments against 91% for mitigation finance. And for cities, this is going to be a problem because, as I explained earlier, cities are vulnerable to the impacts of climate, to sea level rise, and will need a lot more financing for adaptation and resilience. Next slide. Now, if we see, we do a bit of a deep dive into the cities and regions around the world. We actually found that the largest proportion of finance was invested in East Asia and the Pacific region. And this is mostly driven by China and in developed countries, particularly in Western Europe and North America. financing for China featured significantly in the capital expenditure estimates for urban transport and buildings, and electric buses. Spending on electric buses was almost entirely in China, for instance. So I think it's important to emphasize here that there's vastly insufficient amounts of urban climate finance being invested in crucial regions such as South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. And we need to do something about that to balance out the climate flows. Next slide. Now here is the gap between investment opportunities and actual investment. The blue dot represents investment opportunities as defined by the IFC. And the red dot is where the current financing is at. And you know, even though we've earlier stated that there's a lot of climate finance flowing to East Asia, it's still well below the investment opportunity. But that is the same, almost the same for all regions where there's a gap between the investment opportunity and the amount of investment flowing at the moment. Next slide. We can skip that one. Okay, yeah. So here's what we believe is needed to close that gap. Of my experience in working with cities, and it's clear that there is a understanding from the cities that this is, it's important to scale up investment in climate resilience. It's important to scale up green investment. They don't necessarily know how to prepare projects, how to get project pipelines in order, where to get the financing for it, how to build mechanisms for innovative financing that would attract private finance investments into it as well. So one of the solutions that the Alliance has put forward for this is the Project Preparation Resource Directory, which helps city governments and stakeholders identify project preparation facilities, PPFs. And this directory is designed to be user-friendly. It's with input from all of the other members and makes it just one step easier to access the knowledge that is needed for city officials to go about preparing a project pipeline. Next. Another knowledge product is, what are the role of national development banks? Because most cities have access, actually, most national development banks have concessional financing mechanisms that are available, accessible to cities, but cities don't know how to access them. It works both ways. The cities have to be more proactive, but the national development banks also have to pitch their products better and more, in a user-friendly way to fit with whatever project pipelines that the city has, and actually work with city officials to prepare these projects together and figure out the financing mechanisms that can be supported by NDBs. Next. And here is a financial toolbox created by the Financial Toolbox Action Group, where when provided with a menu of financing mechanisms, that's where horizons are broadened, where city officials often think, if a new project needs to get done, how much state budget do we have? How much city budget do we have? Actually, and that's my experience, even with huge metropolitan cities like Jakarta, they don't necessarily think outside of the immediate city budget. But actually, there's a huge, vista, an array of other financial mechanisms that would unlock other types of financing, whether it's financing from NDBs or development finance institutions or in the private sector. So this financial toolbox ranks, or doesn't rank, but lays out a menu of financial mechanisms and instruments. We've 12 mechanisms and 72 instruments so far that will hopefully help city officials make a better decision as to how to leverage more finance. Next. Next. So it's important at the end of the day to be able to mobilize finance, as well as to measure the progress in mobilizing finance. And so here is where what is being attempted by the Leadership for Urban Climate Investment, or LUCI, which has a target, has a specific target that 2,000 cities have strengthened capacities in project preparation, 1,000 climate smart urban projects are bankable by 2025. Next, after they become bankable, they get linked to finance. And after they get linked to finance, they successfully utilize new financing mechanisms. And if we were to illustrate this in a flow, next slide. This is what it would look like, where, you know, if you're a city official, how do I start? Well, first of all, we provide local capacity development so that city governments are able to go about preparing a project. And then after that, how do we support the project pre-feasibility and project feasibility studies to make sure that the project is bankable? And then after that, how it is linked to finance. Matchmaking process happens here. And it's able to happen because there is a huge network of different players in each of these columns that are able to provide cities with this kind of support. This helps in accelerating finance to cities, as I'll demonstrate in the next slide. This process so far has successfully enhanced project preparation capacity in 500 cities, made 91 bankable projects, 48 projects have been linked to finance for implementation, and 18 innovative financing mechanisms have been created to support climate smart infrastructure in cities. While we're still far from the target, this does show that if there is a concerted effort and a collaborative effort to fill in the gaps in each step of the project flow until finance is actually mobilized to projects in cities, then you know, we'll go some way towards our target of mobilizing climate finance to urban cities. I think that's my last slide. If you can just go to the last one. No, that's fine. That's all I had. Last slide is a thank you. And if you wanted to find out more about the CCFLA, the City Climate Finance Leadership Alliance, you can visit our website or climatepolicyinitiative.org. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Tisa. Okay, now I'd like to call on Mr. Drazen Kusten, who is the Senior Urban and Energy Efficiency Specialist at GCF. And he is going to talk to us on financing modalities for cities' climate actions, leveraging finance and blended, leveraging climate and blended finance. Over to you, Drazen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. Colleagues, I really enjoyed the discussions to date. Very, very interesting overall. And I hope to bring a little bit more clarity as to what GCF is doing in terms of how do we engage modalities for specifically climate and blended finance. Next, please. So above all, I just want to reiterate that cities are one of the biggest culprits in current emissions that we are trying to chase with respect to the 1.5 degree targets. Average per capita emissions vary very widely, but I mean, obviously developed countries and cities have more emissions than developing country cities. There is a close interaction between urban forms, service access, and per capita GHG emissions, and you can see how vast the differences are between developing and developed countries. The International Energy Agency estimates that currently we have about 71% of GHG emissions coming from energy sources in cities, and we will have 76% of energy emissions coming from sources, urban sources in 2030, unless we do specific intervention. And these are not only scope 1 emissions, but also scope 2 and scope 3 emissions. So emissions are much more complicated to monitor and understand. And please, let's all grasp this complexity to try to understand how we can bring these emissions down. Of course, the importance of urban economies in the same time, and this is the paradox perhaps of developed world, is that Tokyo and New York already have greater GDP than the entire Canada, and by 2030, New Delhi is expected to have a greater GDP than the entire Malaysia. So that's how important the urban economies are for the livelihoods and growth and jobs, but in the same time, if they continue to pollute and emit GHG, we have no future as Earth, I think. So we need to focus on interventions in terms of urban form, integrated transportation systems, greater material products and activities efficiency, and low carbon energy and lower energy intensity. Next, please. So the rationale for climate change transformative urban investment is actually embedded in the UNFCCC Technical Paper 13 from 2014, which refers to integrated cross-sectoral mitigation activities in urban areas that best illustrate the transformational impact, suggests that through strong mitigation action aimed at low carbon, climate resilient development at the local level across the key sectors, such as buildings, transportation, and waste, cities in aggregate can reduce their GHG emissions in these core sectors by an estimated 24% by 2030 and 47% by 2050. If we do so, then the cities would do their fair share in trying to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. To undertake this core mandate to foster paradigm shift and transformation addressing climate change, the GCF needs to, can you go back? GCF needs to find ways to influence and where possible fundamentally alter the form and functioning of urban systems. That's what our mission is. Next slide. So these are the typical cities in developing countries we are trying to fix. Next slide. So in a way that we can best identify transformative action field for cities generally in development and also from climate change prism, we have the following action fields that we need to focus on. Decarbonization of energy sector, of course, improving of energy efficiency in building stocks, mobility and transportation, urban form, urban resilience. We heard that there's far too little money flowing to the adaptation, materials and material flow, such as the circular economy, and of course, improving the waste management. Next slide. This looks a little bit complicated slide, but it really best explains, how we build the GCF intervention for the urban sector. We have 4 or 5 paradigm shift pathways that we are really trying to focus on in terms of GCF interventions. We have decarbonized and distributed energy. We have energy efficient buildings. We have green mobility and enhanced cities. We have circular urban economy and compact and resilient cities. And we are driving paradigm shift through 4 drivers: transformational planning and programming, catalyzing climate innovation, mobilization of finance at scale, above all, and expansion and replication of knowledge. So when we, as you know very well, the GCF is the financial instrument of the Paris Agreement. Our primary goal and target is to assist developing countries achieving their NDCs, national determined contributions, right? So in terms of urban sector, we are engaging with all developing countries to try to streamline transformational planning and programming, catalyzing climate innovation, mobilization of finance together with us, and expansion and replication of knowledge to achieve targets that pertain to the urban sector energy efficiency. Next slide. In terms of diagnostics, we feel, and you heard from previous speaker, we have significant lack and gaps in urban climate financing across the world, and especially in specific geographic locations such as East Asia. In terms of diagnostic, we have urgent need, therefore, for urban climate financing recalibration at global scale. And we have to particularly look into the dichotomy or how the national governments interact with local governments. As you know, most of the cities will need to receive the subnational climate financing solutions or decentralized financing solutions that are under control of the national governments. So what we really have to look into is, what top-down approaches we are taking from national government's perspective and what bottom-up approaches we are taking from local government's perspective. I will explain in further slides that actually the global climate access to finance is actually very low. Yeah. So we need to look into the causes for ineffective mitigation resilience financing delivery conduits and what we can do as active players, active donors in this space to improve such a situation. So all lies into the varying degree of local government and financing autonomy and how the project pipeline is really developed with priorities for climate finance. I will leave it at that and we'll have a discussion afterwards. Next slide. Of course, the range of possible solutions we can think of to approach improved climate finance for cities. On the demand side, we can look into developing capacity for structuring hybrid and catalyzing financing solutions, knowledge transfer, and policy support. We should think of the project development vehicles. We should look into the greening of existing public finance flows. We need to improve private participation in financing. We need to look into legal and regulatory framework. Obviously, look for instruments to enhance creditworthiness of cities and utilities and municipal revenues. And on the long run, of course, strengthen the domestic capital markets. And I would say national development banks also plays a significant role here. In terms of supply of the finance, we have to look into the facilitative financing mechanisms, such as the municipal development funds, incentive structures, such as risk mitigation and credit enhancement, specialized financial instruments and mechanisms, such as pooled finance, insurance, revolving funds, municipal bonds, guarantees, viability gap subsidies and funding, as well as to look into the public money as a seed source to attract and mobilize private finance. I mean, one thing that we will certainly strengthen here as a message from GCF is that we are actually using public finance money to de-risk and catalyze as much as private investment possible, right? Okay, next slide, please. So how do we invest? We invest through a range of financial instruments. We are using concessional loans, we are using grants, we are using guarantees and equity. And let me again stress here that in the 5 years of my working career at GCF as a lead for urban sector, we constantly see far too much pressure on grants and far little engagement through concessional loans, equity and guarantees. And we always ask from cities and municipal governments and provincial governments and national governments to share with us the burden of financing, to co-finance with us, to look how the risk can be reduced, so the other financial conduits can really work its best towards interventions for climate. Not only just requesting, grants to fill in the gaps that, have not been properly covered by NDCs or national planning process. So of course we can provide project-based SPVs, direct equity funds, funds of funds, structured finance vehicles, and on lending, anything you want, provided that the project pipeline is really well structured and well thought through through NDCs and NDAs of each country dealing with. Next slide, please. Our financial terms and conditions, people often do not know. So I will say the following. In terms of grants and concessional loans, in terms of grants are available in all major convertible currencies. We have grants without repayment contingencies, and we have grants with repayment contingencies. And terms are usually adapted to the required level of concessionality of the project of the program. So depends on the level of risk, depend whether the country is least developed country, whether the country belongs to SIDS, small island developing states, whether the country is a middle income country that is already trying to break from being termed development country in development and so forth. So quite a few things are really depending on how we actually employ grants. In terms of concessional loans, we have concessional loans that actually provide 0% interest rate for the most concessional projects, and it can go up to 0.75% interest rate. You see all of the other terms. We have maturity up to 40 or 20. We have grace periods 10 to 20, and all other details are provided in the presentation. So we have tremendous concessionality that we can employ in a very productive way, provided that we believe in climate impact, theory of change, log frame, specific investment objectives that are stated in our funding proposals. Next slide. So the role of the Green Climate Fund above all is to de-risk and provide concessionality. So let me be clear. We do hear there is a gap in urban climate finance. We are doing our absolute best to cover that gap. The current portfolio that my team and I developed in the past 5 years is exceeding $3 billion. And of course, there is a much more needed to be done. But what I'm asking you is to properly understand the role of GCF and for all of us to learn lessons from the existing portfolio and projects we have currently supported, right? So we are looking into reducing risk in transactions, anchoring the role for co-investors to participate, fostering behavioral changes to stronger climate impacts, creating demand for making climate solutions affordable. So instruments of this concessionality are pricing concessionality, subordinated positions, flexible term and tenor, as I explained in the previous slide, flexible guarantees, and fit for purpose grants only to foster future climate actions. So, definitely grants can play a role, but I'm underlying again, we cannot support, grant requests of 100 million plus, that's for sure. So we also leveraging private sector institutional investors and development financing institution support for green growth in developing countries. Next slide. So this is simply a summary slide of what we look for. We look for additionality of GCF funding. So GCF funding cannot be standing alone on reaching the climate impact. We're looking particularly for strong climate rationale, and this is even more so elaborated in adaptation and urban resilience projects. We are looking for country-driven approach, so countries should really own it and stand behind the project. We have 6 investment criteria that is really our Bible in how we approach financing. We have 8 results areas that we focus on. We have a number of policies that we have to comply on GCF, and we have always look into a close completeness of documentation. So our review cycle is somewhat complex. It is not very fast, but when we leave a mark, we leave a mark of the GCF stamp for countries NDC, theory of change for 6 investment principles, and project that is approved by GCF has, I think, a permanent stamp of visibility and sustainability, I would say. Next slide. So why cities? I think I did explain earlier that cities are one of the major culprits in emissions, but cities and urban areas are also identified in the Special Report 1.5 by IPCC as one of the 4 critical global systems transitions that can actually accelerate ambition and upscale climate action. So in all of our discussions that we have heard at COP26, where we are still doubting whether 1.5 degrees Celsius goal is alive or not alive, in fact, one of the make or break factors will be cities, no doubt. And so we still have a significant gap between conceptualizing climate action plan in cities, implementing dedicated hardcore infrastructure interventions, and proper backing by policy, regulatory reforms, and cost recovery measures. A lot of actors in helping cities conduct studies, but limited actors and TI instruments are helping with making projects viable. So we have to look into decoupling of economic growth and emissions and to continue using structural change. Next slide. Selected GCF portfolio, as I mentioned earlier, we have about 3 billion portfolio in GCF in urban sector and energy efficiency to date. I would just like to mention a couple of potentially most relevant projects with the best lessons learned in terms of urban climate financing. These are the green affordable housing in Mongolia with ADB, recent approved project ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility many ASEAN countries. World Bank in Vietnam, where we have very successfully used the guarantee facility for energy efficiency, ADB's, and our first project in PRC China with ADB, catalyzing climate finance for the Shandong Green Development Fund. Somebody is saying that slides are not visible, by the way. UNDP scaling up investment in low carbon public buildings in Bosnia, and EBRD Green Cities multi-country project for nine countries. So these are just some of the examples how far we can get when we are combining best possible project design with climate finance interventions. Thank you. Next slide. So very shortly, we are very proud for the first GCF project in China, catalyzing climate finance in the Shandong Green Development Fund. This is the third most polluting province in China that has already started with proactive provincial climate change policies to decarbonize the economy. Next slide. So the way that we have created GCF investment framework in a project design was to actually enable project to generate pipeline of bankable climate positive sub-projects that are properly screened and assessed based on 6 investment criteria and proper baseline. And we actually have a 3 sub-sectors. We look into transformational projects, we look into the projects with advanced benefits, and we look into projects that provide good practices. So we have kind of a sub-segmentation of project pipeline that is properly screened and assessed, that best fits the GCF investment criteria, and therefore will provide highest climate benefit and impact for the of the province. Next slide. And of course, we have a very robust monitoring evaluation in terms of international green and financial rating for each sub-project, reporting the developing milestones and targets, and tracking funds for disbursements and reflows. We also have due diligence of investors, investment framework, including ADB loan agreement, and annual performance report. So in short, what I didn't say maybe or did not come up clearly is that our joint project is with ADB, KfW, and AFD, where we are providing jointly 1.5 billion facility, which is supposed to leverage $12 billion in private finance for climate impact. So I think it's a very good project to learn some lessons. Next slide. Finally, most important lesson for this project is shifts from business as usual to good practices to ensure that there are advanced benefits and transformational climate positive sub-projects based on international climate standards. Selection of sub-projects is based on climate mitigation adaptation benefits, bankability, critical mass of catalytic funding, and leveraging, which allows the fund to enter sector with low interest from the private, institutional, and commercial investors. So classical case where we de-risk, we pick up a good project with high climate impact. We stay with the public finance as long as the projects cannot start returning the income, and then the projects are turned to the private sector. So with such an effect, we will achieve 70 million tons CO2 equivalent. Mitigation impact, we will benefit close to 100 million people, and we are going to leverage an original investment of 1.5 billion to about 12 billion of total leverage effect. Next slide. Okay, I think this is just a slide summarizing, how many projects and how we look into the returns of the transformational advanced benefits and good practices project in a given portfolio. Just and provides a good overview of the megatons equivalent and returns that we have on these sub-projects. Thank you. I would like to stop my presentation here. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you very much, Drazen. That was really good in terms of detail in what kind of financing mechanisms actually work with respect to Green Climate Fund and in terms of leveraging private sector financing. Our next presentation is by Mr. Dingwei Huang, He was the Deputy Director of the Financial Affairs Office at the Huzhou Municipal Government, and he's going to talk about green finance in Huzhou's low carbon transition. Over to you, Mr. Huang.
感谢主持人的介绍，感谢主办方的邀请。
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. And I'd like to also thank the organizer of this event for inviting me here today. I've also listened to the previous presentations. I'm from the Fuzhou City government, and today I have three things that I would like to talk about. I'll talk about the Fuzhou City's green transition, how we are utilizing green finance for our green transition in the city of Fuzhou. Can you please turn to the next page? And one more page, please. I'd like to give you a brief introduction of the city Fuzhou. Fuzhou is located in the central area of China's Yangtze River Delta. It is about 100 kilometers away from Shanghai. And if you take the high-speed train, you can reach there a lot quicker. It takes about only 21 minutes from Fuzhou to Hangzhou. Fuzhou is the birthplace of the development theory, which describes lucid waters and lush mountains are invaluable assets. It has beautiful landscape, and the natural landscape was also recognized by the Prime Minister of China. Our GDP is about 130 million Chinese yuan. Next page, please. Huzhou is one of the pilot cities for green finance reform and innovations. It was approved as a model city in 2017, and as you see, there are a number of pilot cities for green innovation and transition. Green financing related pilot projects are being conducted. So I'd like to give you some of the examples on what kind of green financing projects that we are conducting in Huzhou. There's energy, industry, construction, and transportation related projects that we are conducting. This is one case that I would like to share with you. Can you please go back by one page? This is related to energy. We are pursuing photovoltaic power generation, and we provide loans for those who have photovoltaic panels installed. We want to make sure that safe and sustainable commercialization will take place. We have energy providers and citizens who install rooftop PV panels installing, and in that case, we provide loans. Through these PV panels, many companies are generating power for their business operation. We have national electricity grid through which the PV generated electricity is transmitted. Residents can use green energy. They can also make profit by selling electricity. For companies, they enjoy a number of benefits. They can lower their energy prices. And banks play an important role in providing loans for PV installation. Future profits of PV power plants, and there are a lot of benefits provided by the banks. This was the first case that I would like to share with you. I'd like to now turn to the next example.
This is related to industrial aspect of green financing. We are measuring CO2 emissions in Fuzhou. We are using advanced technologies to measure effective CO2 measurement. Companies in Huzhou City can use QR code to measure their CO2 emissions. There are 3 different indicators. There is a comparison of carbon intensity with other companies in the same industry. And there's also low level, mid level, high level emission level. There's also zero CO2 companies that we monitor continuously. And financial institutions develop financial instruments and sign an agreement with a company in recognition of the CO2 reductions and provide financial support. Now I'd like to talk about the building sector. Providing green financing, we make investment in green building. What we are seeing is one of the landmark in the city. The total floor area is 70 million square meters, and it is a green financing project. And this received 3-star green building certificate. And carbon neutral green bond was used to make investment in this project. This was a project that a lot of investors were interested in, and for this building, in the city of Fuzhou, there are a number of standards and regulations being established. We have a pilot zone, and for this zone, you at least have 2-star certificate in order to build new structures. Please go to the next page. Now, I would like to, it's the previous page. This is a case where green financing was used for transportation sector. In China, in order to promote zero-emission mobility, we want to encourage drivers to drive less so that we can lower the emissions. And the insurance premium is linked to the driving practice. So if you drive less, then you will be able to lower the insurance premium for your car. So low emissions are linked to car insurance premiums. So if you have low mileage and if you don't drive your vehicles very often, you get discount on your insurance premium. For companies that actively introduce and install PV panels, they can receive financial support from the insurance companies. Next, I'd like to talk about some of the actual practices of Huzhou in terms of green financing. We have ESG evaluation model that we developed in the city of Huzhou. So this is a tool that we use to measure the company's performance on sustainable development. For companies of certain size, they receive scoring from this ESG evaluation. We look at the efforts on carbon emissions reduction, pollution reduction, resource recycling, and environmental protection. And these are the items that we have for the ESG evaluation. We also evaluate their social corporate responsibility activities and the support that they provided to the local residents or the members of the community. So based on the evaluation outcomes, we evaluate the companies. So we have the evaluation model, and this evaluation must be conducted with companies of certain size. And this evaluation is really important to promote more active engagement of the companies in sustainable development. We also have green loan platform. It is really difficult for small-sized companies to access loan. There is a huge demand for SMEs to get loans, but it's oftentimes difficult to get bank loans. So in this platform, let's say there is a company, small company that is seeking to get a loan, and if their business related to sustainable development, then different banks offer their own rates so that the potential obligor can choose the best rates that are offered on this platform. So this is the second project that's been implemented in Huzhou. Next page, please. Yes, this one. What we're doing in Huzhou is that we have what's called the carbon neutral bank, or we have a plan to establish carbon neutral bank. We want to make sure that banks also be part of our efforts to realize carbon neutrality in terms of operation and their business operation and management. We want to make sure that banks also become carbon neutral. We are encouraging all the banks to achieve carbon neutrality. And also we want to encourage banks to provide more green financing and green loans. If there are low emission related business projects, we want to have these banks to make loans so that those projects can be materialized. We want to make sure that banks provide loans to as many net zero projects as possible by 2030. Conventional internal combustion engine projects will not be able to receive loans from financial institutions. Also, we want to utilize and leverage financial services in order to achieve society-wide carbon neutrality. Next page, please. The fourth project that we have is to establish a platform for information disclosure of financial institutions. This is, as of now, is a pilot project. Financial institutions, including banks, are encouraged to disclose their information related to environment. There are a number of information items. There are development projects and innovative financial instruments, and green financing research achievements and actual investment realized. And these are the type of information that the banks are encouraged to provide and make public. It's been about 3 years that this project was implemented, and green financing related information is now being provided on a number of items on this platform. We also have what's called green credit statistics. With the advancement of fintech, we made this system. Along with financial institutions, including the People's Bank of China, we created statistics system. Compared to other banks, unfortunately, the People's Bank of China doesn't have highly advanced statistics system. Now we are registering and collecting data on green financing, and on this platform, we can understand how much energy is saved, how much CO2 emissions are reduced. And on this system, we can also evaluate green project-related loan. We use financial technologies to evaluate banks on their green performance. We look at their asset structure and measure them or evaluate them. And we also understand the impact of the bank's green investment. We also work with the Financial Supervisory Authority in assessing the bank's performance and give different scorings to banks. So this is also used as a means to supervise financial institutions. Last but not least, this is not included in my slides, but this project was recently launched and the related system has been recently enacted. You know, we now have a law to promote green financing. So this is the first enactment that deals with ESG system establishment. And for energy, industry, transportation, and construction, the tools developed can be utilized. And in this act, investment promotion and financial support are also addressed. So we are also reviewing and adjusting our existing institutions in order to promote green financing in the city of Huzhou. And we are further upgrading and sophisticating the green financing model that was established many years ago. To summarize my talk, first, companies can now request loan online and receive loans online. And second, there is a ESG platform where companies are evaluated on their ESG performance. And financial companies are also subject to ESG evaluation, and depending on the evaluation outcome, they can work on pricing, or they can also develop new financial instruments. And the financial authority can also have supervision on financial institutions using the new evaluation mechanism. And financial institutions are now required to provide information on their green performance, especially their performance on green financing. Through these efforts, we will continue our efforts to realize low carbon cities through green financing. And there are a lot of engagement coming from the financial sector and financial institutions. With that, I'll finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Mr. So we move on, as I said, to the representative of the Asian Development Bank, Mr. Arno Heckman, who is a principal urban development specialist within the Mongolia Resident Mission. And he's going to present on integrated and transformative approaches and financing solutions for low carbon city development, the example of urban projects in Mongolia. Prize for the longest title, Arno. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike, and good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, everybody. I'm very happy to be here for this very important event. If we can put the slide, great. So I'm going to talk, as Mike mentioned, integrated and transformative approaches and financing solutions for low carbon city development. And we are going to see a few examples in Mongolia on how we use those approaches and the financing solution we develop, especially in collaboration with the Green Climate Fund. Next slide, please. So first, just to set the scene, and this has been done already. This has been said already by other intervention, but the amount of investment for cities to achieve the goal of Paris Agreement is huge. Everybody has his own figures, but there is no way that the financing capacity of the government and the municipality can reach this level of financing. Here we have calculated 23 trillion from 2016 to 2030. And so there is a huge need for having the private sector and commercial banks to help in these partnerships to reach those goals. And certainly as a development partner, what we are doing is a drop of water. So it means that we cannot develop any more individual investment solution. We have to come up with intervention which imply transformative changes. And this is fundamental. And when I say transformative changes, it doesn't mean only on the system, but also on the strategical development of a city or a city in the territory. We are going to see later that we can use city investment to influence also the green development and low carbon development of a territory. And for that, of course, we need to remove the barrier toward green investment and find a reliable technological solution that is sustainable and replicable. And I must add something also that's, the government capacity and demand have changed. In the past, we were supposed to do very simple investment, very straightforward. But this is not the case anymore. We are looking for integrated approach, complex development projects, and this is the demand of the government also. They want to have solution and not investment, and they also tend to prefer big scale projects rather than the set of small scale projects because they are easier to implement. Next slide, please. So very quickly, what is transformative? Because I think we have to define that. This is different than change. Change are discrete shift, where transformative induce a change in paradigm and a reorientation of the development strategy. And normally, it induces systemic and structural change and institutional transformation. And they are based most of the time in a vision, strategic objective, and interdependent initiatives. And that is very important, especially because those transformative approach need a transition time. And these transition times, this is where we are supposed to, provide our knowledge and our financing and our solutions to make this transition and to deliver the capability for transformation. An integrated approach also is a very generic term. We often use it in our project, but there is so many different type of integration. You have the horizontal integration, vertical integration, multi-sector integration, integration of finance solution. And the one who is really able to deliver transformative is really the multi-integrated and comprehensive approach. They are the one really who can really impact on the system, on the city, or on the development strategy. And just want to also mention the large-scale approach. It doesn't mean size, but most of the time it's combined with size, because large-scale urban operation somehow tend to stimulate other urban process. And they involve many stakeholders and have the capacity to create synergy and the developing enable environment for other projects and for other initiatives to build on it. Next slide, please. So we are going to quickly see two examples in Mongolia, and just want to highlight first the importance of the strategic development phase. So it's very important at the beginning to understand why is the issue to promote a more low carbon, resilient, and inclusive development. And once the problem is set, then there is a lot of analysis and in-depth assessment on the climate angle, on the development angle, to develop key solution and mechanism. And again, focusing on really strategy and mechanism instead of investment. And especially elaborate public, private, and people solution to get the support from private sector and also to promote the community participation. And those projects also we need to have in mind that they have to, because of their size and the scale, to promote strong partnerships. So we are not alone. There is many development partners, many government initiatives. So those have to be built in synergy with other partners and create really a catalytic change to reach the goal of the development in a city or in a country. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are going to see two different projects in Mongolia. One is focusing on Ulaanbaatar, and the aim is to redevelop the substandard, highly emitting and vulnerable peri-urban area of Ulaanbaatar cities, and the other, and to change it into green, livable, and inclusive urban development. And the other one is focusing more on the territorial development and see cities not only as a cities but also as a link with the urban-rural development and how we can use integrated approach in a city to develop a green territorial development approach and promote a green agribusiness development. Next slide, please. Okay, so we are in Ulaanbaatar here, and for people who don't know Ulaanbaatar situation, we have 60% of the city which live in a substandard peri-urban area. So basically the city is 1.5 million and you have more than 800,000 people who live with no access to sanitation, limited access to water, poor drainage, dirt road, no access to socio-economic facility, relying on individual stove fueled by coal, and a very poor housing system and lack of public space, etc. So can you imagine 800,000 people relying on individual stove fueled by coal, the level of pollution, but the level of emission. And in this situation, how the people are very vulnerable to climate change, especially to harsh winter. So our approach here with the city of the municipality of Ulaanbaatar was in 3 steps. First, acting at the master plan level. And because before 2014, those peri-urban areas, those 800,000 people were not included in the city master plan. So we work with the city to include for the first time the peri-urban area. We call it, sorry, GER areas. GER is the name of the Mongolian tent. To integrate that for the first time in the city master plan and develop a strategy based on that. And the strategy is to say there is no way we can initiate a redevelopment process which is compact and low carbon and resilient with a piecemeal approach. If we focus on improving some part of this peri-urban area, it has to be fully integrated with full range of services. Because the issue here is, because there is no services, the private sector do not invest. It's more costly to do business in those areas than in the city center. So this integrated approach was very important. And the other steps, once the key infrastructure are there, to look for affordable housing and green affordable housing solution through eco-district development. Next slide, please. Oh, next slide. So this is the first project. So to fit with the master plan, we have developed a multi-tranche financing facility, a 10 years project with 3 tranches, and each tranches was targeting the development and the upgrading of small secondary center in the GER areas. We call it sub-center. And the strategy was to develop 6 sub-centers. 6 sub-centers over 10 years, 2 sub-centers by tranches. And as you can see on the right, upper right, we have here the full range of infrastructure: road, water, wastewater, district heating, river embankment, urban park, kindergarten, business incubator, even sport complex. So really to focus on how to recreate the attractivity in the sub-centers and to promote the enable environment for the private sector and the communities to invest and grow. Also, it's not only about extending infrastructure. We worked at the water authority level and wastewater treatment plant level to make sure that all those services are well served and well treated. Next slide, please. Yeah, sorry. So these first projects, now the first one is completed. We have all the infrastructure, and we can see already the change. We can see the private sector who starts to invest. But we wanted to go the step further and to provide a solution for the people to upgrade themselves and access to modern housing unit or modern apartment. And one specific aspect of Ulaanbaatar is the people have land tenure. So to use the land tenure of the people to swap their land and to promote them access on site to apartment. Because at the end of the day, if you look at those peri-urban area, and not only for Ulaanbaatar, the main issue is affordable housing. People go there because it's the only area which is affordable to them. So the idea of the project is also to develop a mechanism and a financing mechanism to develop urban area the way it should be: mixed use, mixed income, low carbon, resilient, efficient, and to develop the entire policy framework on urban development and green building standards and affordable housing. So the aim of this project is to develop 10,000 housing units, 55 affordable, 15% social, 30% market rate. And we wanted to have it within the context of the urban development. So with and to deliver them with the tool of the eco district. So eco district is a small block of urban area, which is as I mentioned, mixed use, mixed income, and green, and develop those block of urban area nearby the infrastructure we have extended. And the eco district is very interesting mechanism because you develop more and more, and at the end you change the city. So it's a very pragmatic tool that's also enabled to work with the policy and act, on the redevelopment on the ground. Next slide, please. So this is very important. So how do we do that? How we recreate those eco districts? How we make sure that we'll have enough financing and we can recreate affordable housing, develop affordable housing, have enough public space, etc. So we have developed this key institutional and financial mechanism where the eco district is designed, and then the investment is separated into two. First, maybe I'm taking too much time. So first, all the municipal infrastructure, the park and the social housing will be financed by the municipality. And then we have worked with GCF to establish a fund, and this fund will promote, will provide a low interest rate loan and mortgage to the real estate developer and the household. So at the end of the day, we have a financing mechanism which is mainly supported by the private sector. And if the private sector follow the technical specification which has been designed for the private sector, they can have access to the low interest rate loan, and they also can have access to grant. And this grant is important because they will be partly reimbursed of the investment if the buildings and the housing are energy efficient and are well designed. So as you can see, it's a large-scale investment, but 570 million, but 300 million will come from the private sector. So at the end of the day, from the municipality, there's a few amount of money that will be provided to the project, while we are going to develop affordable housing. There is many aspects here, and we have also a very important land swapping mechanism where the people on site can access to housing, and a lot of innovating design. And also we have sector loans that will promote the policy reform and institutional strengthening. Next slide, please. If my time is very limited, maybe, so you have all the benefits and some design of the ecodistrict we have developed now. And the important is a transformational impact of the project. I'll move very quickly to the other one, Mike, if you allow me. Next slide, please. Yeah, the other one is another project in Mongolia also, where we wanted to promote urban development in remote provinces, or named IMAG, in Mongolia. And for this, we wanted to have both an urban development approach, but also to promote economic development. When we start to study the issue, we realize that those cities are mainly relying on livestock and agribusiness sector. But the agribusiness sector and the livestock were facing a huge challenge because of the vulnerability of the herders to climate change. There was a huge increase in terms of livestock number, and the livestock number was degrading the rangeland. And now you have more than 70% of the rangeland of Mongolia which is degraded. And this degradation has a huge impact on the carbon sequestration in the soil. And also all the herders as a mechanisms to defend themselves from climate change and harsh winter goes to quantity instead of quality. And then there is no value chain. The value chain were not developed, and so there's no way the value chain could also process the material from the herders, because there is very, very few processing facility on site. And if you look at those three aspects, if you try to solve them, separately, it doesn't work. If you put infrastructure investment in the cities to render them more resilient and low carbon and livable, but if there is no job, then it doesn't work. If you work on a rangeland, but there is no value chain to buy the quality product from the herders, it doesn't work. And if you provide financing to the value chain, and there is very poor raw material from the livestock, and there is not infrastructure for them to invest at the point of need, it doesn't work neither. Next slide, please. So you have to, I'm going to be fast because the time is limited. So you have to take all those aspects and try to solve them in a very integrated manner. So revive the IMAG and SUM with low carbon investment, sustainable and climate resilient rangeland management, have innovative finance to attract the livestock value chain, and of course capacity building and awareness and policy reform support. Next slide, please. Again, very quickly, there is so many detail, and this is what we have done. We have designed a project, and we have been supported by EIB and by GCF to provide full integrated urban infrastructure in the targeted cities. In parallel, we are also supporting herders for sustainable rangeland management, for them to establish cooperative, to be certified, and to have a traceability system, to have a fodder production for the animals, and for them to have a higher income and to decrease the number of animals. And they can have all those support only if they start to decrease the number of animals and move from quantity to quality. And of course, capacity building, policy reform. And how we create the link between cities and rangeland and green territory is through the private sector. Again, we have here a financial intermediation, a little bit in the same way than for the green affordable housing. And we use it to say to the businesses, look, if you invest at the point of need in the small cities, then you are going to benefit from low interest rate loan. You are going to benefit from guarantees and even with innovative grants. But you have to be located in the agro park for which we are going to put the infrastructure. And we are going to deal with the herders who have been committed to low carbon and sustainable rangeland management. And only through that, we can create the link and create the urban-rural linkage. Next slide, please. So we're not going into detail. Next slide. Very integrated, also urban approach, working on energy efficient infrastructure, redeveloping also peri-standard urban area in those small cities. And here is the financing tool. We'll call it the GIRAF, the Green Inclusive Regional Agribusiness Fund. And really the idea is to move a situation where in those IMAGs, remote IMAG, there is no processing facility. They are all, most of them are all around Ulaanbaatar, and to move them back near at the point of need, nearby the rangeland, and create the link between the herders and livestock sectors to decrease the number of animals, to have a better rangeland management practice, to reduce the number of animals, sorry, and to restore the rangeland natural ecosystem. And this is important because we have worked with the GCF to calculate how much of a ton of CO2 will the soil can capture if you decrease the number of animals. And the number is huge, actually. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yeah, it shows like for this project, so it's a 10-year project. It's developing the territorial model to be replicated all over Mongolia, to create synergy with other development partners who are working in the same field. But what I wanted to highlight is because it's integrated, we also have very synergetic environmental, economic, social, and climate benefits. So with the rangeland restoration, and the low carbon city development, we managed to have a 170 million ton of CO2. Which is quite big for this kind of project, with a capacity of replication in the country which reached more than 440 million ton of CO2 over 20 years. Ecosystem restoration of 28 million hectares, and a huge social economic benefit with 11.4 400 green direct job and 150 indirect jobs. So it really promotes green recovery after the COVID and economic diversification. And of course, also a lot of adaptation for the herders and for the urban dweller. I'm going to stop here, otherwise Mike will not be happy with me. I thanks everybody for listening. Thank you.
Thanks, Arno. And I should say, Arno actually is doing some of the most innovative work in ADB. I mean, the kinds of work that he's doing epitomize the kinds of things that the GCF would like to focus on, working through national development banks in inclusive, cross-cutting, low carbon and adaptation projects. So it's an example of the sort of projects that we aspire to. Now, I'm sorry to everybody, we don't have enough time for questions, so it just falls to me to thank everybody, all of the panelists who actually did fantastic jobs. So really, really useful and interesting examples of financing. And I'm very proud to have been associated with today's event. Thank you very much again to the organizers, and thank you to the panelists. Great.
Thank
you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Linfeld, and all the panelists. We do hear your passion and the need to continue. However, time is really limited, and that makes us to really shorten our sessional break from 10 to 5 minutes. So we hope everyone can be coming back in about just 5 minutes. We'll be playing some nice music. So by the end, please do come back. And we look forward to seeing everyone again very shortly. Thank you very much. Colleagues, welcome back. Now we'll be moving on to the final session of the forum, session 5, Stakeholder Engagement for Inclusive and Participatory Climate Action. I would like to introduce our moderator for this session, Ms. Song Bong-hee. Ms. Song is the coordinator of the Global Cabinet of Mayors ICLEI Korean office. Ms. Song, the floor is yours.
지금 시작하면 되나요?
Can I start now? Nice to meet you all. Good afternoon. I'm a moderator of the International Forum on Low Carbon City. My name is Bong-hee Son at ICLEI Korea office. Thank you so much for inviting me as a moderator today. Let me briefly introduce myself. So the translator said GCOM, but it's called a GCOM, Global Climate Energy of Mayors. And that's sharing the result of the relevant project. And in Korea, around 21 municipalities are participating in it. And I'm also I am supporting such AGCOM-related activities at ICLEI Korea office. Then now let's move on to session 5, which is very important because this is about stakeholder engagement for inclusive and participatory climate action. We have 5 presenters in session 5. If time is allowed, we would have a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please feel free to type your question on the chat room. And then I would give a chance for speakers to answer your questions. The first speaker is a Korean speaker who's going to share the experiences in Korea. This speaker is very passionate.
The next speaker is Ms. Park Jang-yeon, Director of Local Government Association for Climate and Energy Transition. She is going to talk about local actions and collaboration for carbon neutrality in the Republic of Korea. Ms. Park, you have 15 minutes, and English translation will be provided. Since there will be a simultaneous translation, please make sure that you speak at a measured pace. If you're ready, please start your presentation. Hello, everyone. My name is Park Jang-yeon, Director of Local Government Association for Climate and Energy Transition. There are 45 municipalities working as members of the association. So please show the slides. Thank you. And please, next page, please. As you see in this slide, in our association, we recently had an event, and I'm showing you one of the most important pictures of the association. In 2016, the association was created, and we had the 4th Executive Committee created, and the current mayor of Goyang City is serving as the chairperson of the 4th Executive Committee. As you see in this slide, we have 45 local governments joining us as a member. there are about 220 local governments and 45 local governments got together to work on local energy transition and our response activities for climate crisis. As was just described, the association was created in the year 2016, and we do local capacity building and energy independence, distributed energy, and local authority for energy, reduction on urban gas consumption, and response to climate crisis are some of the activities that we do in the association. The mayors believe that this type of activities do need to have citizen engagement. So we also have collaboration with the local associations. And we collaborate on climate crisis response measures, and there are also collaboration happening to devise policies. Because we are a group of local governments, we mainly do local institution improvement, and we also devise policies. I would like to introduce to you some of the recent activities or events of the association. Unlike European countries and other advanced countries that have begun their actions earlier, only last year in June, the association got together and worked on the climate emergency declaration. The heads of local municipalities joined and provided their signature to this declaration. And by joining in this declaration, in order to limit the global warming by 1.5 degrees Celsius, the cities will establish targets and work proactively to achieve those targets. Before this climate emergency declaration, I received a lot of questions from other countries. One of the questions was it really possible to gather all the signatures of heads of 226 local governments? Yes, they all joined and they participated in this joint declaration, which can be said that all the citizens of South Korea got together for this emergency declaration. I'm going to skip the rest of the slide and moving on to the next slide. I'd like to share with you some of the cases of local governments. So, next slide, please. This is the picture from the climate crisis emergency declaration. I did not mention this in previous slides. I understand that there are representatives from other countries and overseas organizations. I understand there were a number of international projects conducted at the European level. Paris and Oslo vice mayors were invited, and we conducted international webinar. In this type of international webinar, usually the speakers are given 10 to 15 minutes to present their cases. I think that amount of time is not sufficient to deep dive what's happening at the local level. So we wanted to have a session where we can really understand what's happening. We invited the Vice Mayor of Paris, and for 2 hours we listened to and have discussions on the Paris climate-related policies. And with the Vice Mayor of Oslo, we also spent 2 hours on how low-carbon emission-related budget are being devised or established and spent, so that we can learn lessons for what we can do in Korea, in Korean local governments. It was possible because we received support from the EU level. Also, because of COVID-19 pandemic, we organized online sessions. So these were two important events where we were able to learn from other countries and other cities. Now I'd like to talk about some of the cases in the local governments in Korea. The cases that I'm going to share with you are separate from the government level initiatives. Of course, we do have supports coming from the central government, and this is not the central government project. Rather, these are project initiatives initiated and conducted by the local governments on their own in consideration of the local characteristics with the engagement of local citizens. So these are some of the things that I really wanted to share with you with other cities and other countries. I also attended the COP26. I really wanted to share these cases. However, I was not able to do so. I hope that there will be other opportunities for us to share these cases with international audiences. The city of Gwangmyeong has a population of 300,000 people. It is just outside Seoul. There are no industrial parks, and there are not so big commercial districts. The city of Gwangmyeong has mostly apartments or residential buildings with high concentration of population. The mayor of Gwangmyeong has a vision to install PV panels to all apartment building rooftops in order to expand renewable energy. However, the local residents' acceptance level on renewable energy was relatively low. The mayor of Gwangmyeong has a strong philosophy, and as soon as he took office, he created a dedicated team on climate crisis and energy conversion. And he also created what's called the Gwangmyeong Autonomous University with a department on climate energy studies for citizens. However, the citizens' acceptance level was low. So this is what he did. In order to improve the citizens' acceptance, the mayor decided to provide training on climate crisis and energy transition on 300,000 Gwangmyeong citizens and launched training programs for citizens. It is not one-time special lectures or special education programs. This is 10-week programs, and it was run for 5 times, and there is an introductory course, an intermediate course, an advanced course. There are 10-week program on energy, 10-week program on buildings. So these are all extended training for citizens. And now this program has resulted in 20 or so citizen lecturers. And these 20 citizen experts are dispatched to extracurriculum programs for elementary schools. So people receive different types of training, but this is extended courses, and this program is unique because it also produces citizen experts to give lectures on other facilities, for example, including schools. Now I'd like to introduce to you the case of Daedeok district of Daejeon City. They have created what's called Energy Cafe in order to improve citizen acceptance of renewable energy. there was a cafe. So there was an existing cafe, and the city officials consulted with the owner of the cafe and proposed to the owner to change it into an energy cafe. So the cafe was renovated with new design, and there are tools that are operated using renewable energy sources, and there are other objects that are operated using different energy sources like hydropower. There are books on energy, and it looks like an exhibition hall, but actually this is a cafe. So this is a typical conventional cafe, but it looks different with new objects installed. So if you visit to enjoy some tea or coffee, you can freely ask questions about what these objects are, and they get curious about the objects that are installed. For the owner of the cafe, he doesn't have to promote his cafe on social media. But still, he attracts a lot of new customers because the concept was new and people had interest in visiting these cafes. So the number of customers grew organically. So his sales grew and he was really happy about it. And the customers also really liked it because it's a different type of experience. They get to learn about energy, they get to learn about climate crisis. And from the government's point of view, you don't have to spend a lot of money to improve public awareness, but it's a new way of making contribution to the local community. So I think this is a really good case. This is another case that I'd like to introduce to you. This is RE100 campaign. This is already popular among big companies. In the city of Taedak district, there are small-scale industrial parks. And in the industrial parks, there are SMEs who want to participate in RE100 campaign. This is Shintanjin Brewery. This is a Korean traditional liquor company, which is makgeolli. We have local distilleries or breweries, and government officials visit these facilities and propose their participation in RE100 campaigns. And the owners of the facilities or owners of the companies question why I have to be part of these efforts. Then the government officials give all the details and information on the campaign, but a lot of times the business owners were not really interested, but the government official kept visiting and persuaded the business owners. And the Shintanjin makgeolli is now promoted as makgeolli, the traditional Korean liquor made by sun or the solar energy. And now this company is now participating in the RE100 campaign, and now there are other SMEs that are interested in joining the RE100 campaign. The PV panels were installed with the support from the Korea Energy Corporation, and it was a project where the support budget was used in an efficient and effective manner. This is a case of Goyang City. In 2018, the mayor of Goyang, for the first in Korea, included the wording Paris Agreement in his campaign manifesto, and he was elected. As soon as he took office, he established and implemented climate-related policies in line with the Paris Agreement. And one of the things that he did was the city of Goyang does not emit a lot of CO2s. So their emission level is relatively lower than other cities in Korea. Even though the population is more than 1 million, they have a lot of green spaces and forests. For the mayor of Goyang City, preserving the forests and green spaces is really important in order to maintain and increase carbon sink. Next page, please. And next page, please. And next. Thank you. Next, this is the case of Jeonju City. Similar to Goyang, the city of Jeonju does not want to have reckless development. They came up with a plan to renew their city without reckless development. If you look at the left picture, probably you will find on the top of the picture with the traditional roof, that's Jeonju train station. Jeonju is famous for the Hanok village, the traditional house village. And in front of Jeonju station, there is a boulevard. In order to make Jeonju a unique city with a lot of offerings for the tourists, he wanted to make a strong identity of the city of Jeju. And now, as you see on the right, he will create green spaces in the boulevard, and there will also be promenade so that people can take a walk, which is going to be a little bit inconvenient for the vehicles running on this road, but it will be a walkable area for the citizens. I shared with you some of the cases of local municipalities in Korea. These projects are separate from the central government projects. These projects were created depending on or in consideration of local characteristics, and it was the city government initiatives. I hope that there will be an opportunity to answer your questions if you have any questions. Hopefully, I'll be able to provide you with more details of these projects. With that, I'll finish my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Park. So she shared with us multiple cases that are run by municipalities in Korea. With the engagement of the citizens, more jobs were created, and through energy cafes, there was a chance for communications with the residents in Taedeok-gu, in Daejeon, and last but not least, the 8 lanes were transformed into the pedestrian streets in Jeonju, which are all very impressive. Thank you so much for your presentation. Then I can see some chats. If it's not either Korean or English, then I can't really understand what it means. So maybe the organizing committee can translate it into either English or Korean. Then I can understand what the questions are. Then let me move on to the second speaker in session 5. The next speaker is Chinese speaker. He is from IGDP, the think tank of the green transformation, and her name is Liu Miu. She is going to talk about Peking Pioneer. So it'll be appreciated if you make a presentation as slowly. If you speak a little slowly, then it would be appreciated.
Okay, great. So you will share this presentation for me, right? Okay, great. Thank you. I will give this presentation in Chinese, so I can give you more information. 各位专家，各位同事，大家下午好！非常高兴呢，有机会代表这个绿色创新发展中心，向各位汇报我们最近这些年来的一些 对中国绿色低碳发展转型的观察和评估的工
In
作。
China,
首先想向大家简单介绍。
there have been some projects in relation to carbon assessment and accomplishment. So let me share with the result of those projects. Now let me be brief. On the assessment project, I hope that we're going to open a new chapter of net zero in the future altogether. So in China, we have a low carbon city pilot project. From 2010 to 12 and 17, we went through actually 3 stages for the low carbon city pilots. As you can see, in 2015, at the first stage, the leading city covered 50% of the emissions. And we realized that it was around the proportion of the leading cities in emissions was 50%. So in China, 80 cities have their own targets for carbon peak. And out of them, 15 cities announced that they're peaking carbon emissions. The target was actually aimed to be accomplished by 2020. So let's take a look at the 12 cities. Next slide. Out of 12 cities, per capita GDP is on the x-axis, and on the y-axis, CO2 emissions were placed here on the slide. And the urban development levels and the CO2 emissions are correlated, as you can see through this diagram. And you see there are 12 cities in China. These cities are especially populated with the 300 billion tons of CO2s. And some of the cities emit large CO2 and the others less. So the distribution is quite broad. We took 2 approaches to assessment. Next slide. Thank you. Look at the data of these cities. We calculated the emission of carbon between 2001 to 2019. So this is a per capita CO2 emission. You see the curve. It's a Kuznets curve. Per capita CO2 emission is dramatically increasing, but the speed is somewhat declining from the peak. And some of the cities rapidly decrease, but some other cities have yet to reach the peak. So there are 3 different patterns. So based on our standard, we assess these 12 cities, if these 12 cities reach the peak or not. Over the past 5 years, we looked at if those cities were stable or not in the curve. You see there are different patterns depending on cities, but the Guangzhou was an exception. In 2016, actually from 2016, the score was 8 to 8.6. There was some difference. The CO2 emissions with an increasing population shows completely different pattern from those of other cities. When we look at the peak, except for Guangzhou, the patterns are quite similar one another. There is only a slight difference. The total emission of cities reaches the peak in different time frame. Next slide, like I said, the 4 cities already reached peak, and the other 4 stay at the status quo, and the rest of 4 have yet to reach the peak. The peaking levels and the emission of CO2 and the period left to the peak should be looked at from now. For those 4 cities which already reached the peak level in GDP per capita were lower than international countries, other countries, and for those cities who shows a status quo, the CO2 emission levels per capita versus GDP per capita were close to peak country, the country which reached the peak. And for those cities which have yet to reach the peak, then the level in GDP per capita is at a low level. And in the next slide, there are 7 categories in terms of low carbon and green index: low carbon management, energy industry, transport, building and carbon sink, and waste management. And by categories, there is a sub-items for assessment. When we give a look to building, new policies strengthened the standard of new buildings, which can help energy efficiency increase. And through the result of the policy assessment, we can receive these scores. Those colored in green are cities which reach the peak, and its scores are higher than the rest of other cities. Beijing, Guangzhou, and Hangzhou rank 1, 2, and 3. Guangzhou has yet to reach the peak, so it's an exception. But so we can assume that there is a slight discrepancy between policy and per capita emission. And on the right hand side, we can take a look at how much standardization is progressed. And in 5 items, the score was 100%, which shows that the policy worked. And between 2003 and 2008, the graph shows an increase. And from 2016, the decrease has started. And in between 2011 to 2016, policy, we can take a look at the relation between policy and consumption. In 2011, Hangzhou City didn't have any policies in relation to climate except for air pollution. But energy consumption reduction policies didn't really exist. But from 2011, smart energy policies were introduced to improve energy efficiency. Since 2016, green low carbon concept and peak concepts were reflected on their policies. So with that comprehensive policies of energy efficiency, a total energy consumption started to gradually decrease. Around from 2013, the total of energy consumption has decreased. Well, actually, it peaked in 2013, and then it stayed there. And from 2016, it started to decrease. Then what would be the implications? Beijing, Hangzhou, Qingdao, those 3 cities witnessed a very rapid economic growth, and they accomplished the peak of the peak. So for the transformation to low carbon cities can go together with economic growth. And also we learned that policies can work, but it should be even further strengthened. Like I said, Guangzhou's policy were really good, but he has yet to reach the peak. Though it's a tendency of policy and the score were really good, but it didn't really lead to a good result yet. So I'm thinking of the scores that I shared with you in the previous slide. Guangzhou recorded around 63. So we learned that it is quite challenging to upgrade the score in the industrial sector. And emission reduction in industrial sector is most critical part in reducing the total emission. Transport and buildings are the very exemplary areas with decreasing emissions, because between around 62% to 72% of them reach the peak. As things are going well in these areas, we expect even better result later on. And Prime Minister Xi at the United Nations announced that China will reach the peak by 2030 and carbon neutrality by 2060. Cities in China from China's cities committed to accelerating their effort for carbon peak and carbon neutrality. So through the climate action, China is trying its best to reach the level of the international community. To that end, the policy should be implemented more efficiently, And also we have to measure the result more scientifically. With this platform, we can exchange information all together. And along with this, we would like to use this as a means to evaluate policies. Like I said a bit earlier, the CO2 emissions of a city should be assessed and evaluated. And for that end, we had a evaluation system. And that tool has a similar function. To sum it up, before we announced the target of the carbon peak, there are many cities which already set the carbon peak target, and over half of the cities subject to our study already reached the peak of carbon. And the central government has taken various actions to reach carbon peak and neutrality. And I hope that the Chinese government and China will accelerate its effort to reach carbon peak and neutrality as soon as possible. Thank you.
So there are many different activities that are happening in the Chinese city levels. You talked about the activities of Chinese cities and the evaluation outcomes of those activities. When we talk about Chinese cities, I think considering carbon peak is really important. Of course, different countries have different situations, so they come up with different targets. And after the targets are set up, they come up with different policies in order to implement their and achieve their targets. It was really impressive that what these Chinese cities are doing. And once again, thank you very much for your detailed presentation. For the cities to implement the policy, it is also important to monitor and assess the outcomes, and sharing those information is also very important, as you mentioned. Now let us turn to the next presentation. Next presenter is from Japan. So we have Mr. Togo Uchida, Executive Director of ICLEI Japan office. He's going to talk about the stakeholder engagement of the local climate action in Japan. So please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Bonhee. Thank you so much for introducing me. So my name is Togo Uchida. I'm the Executive Director for ICLEI Japan office. I'm in charge of the ICLEI operation in Japan, where we have around 21 local governments who are, as a member, representing around 30% of our national population. Today, my title of the presentation is Stakeholder Engagement of Local Climate Action in Japan. I'm sorry that the title is slightly different from the program, but I realized that by looking at the program, I think I will touch upon more on the stakeholder engagement rather than touching upon governance. But I will mention about governance, but nonetheless, let me start my presentation. So next page, please. So I will first introduce the current status, commitments, and challenges and approach of Japan. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I would like to focus on the background of stakeholder engagement in Japan, rather than introducing individual example, because I understand that the listeners here are coming from a different part of the world where we have quite a lot of different range of governance. So I think if I introduce you about the background, I think you will get more of an idea of where and how the Japanese government, local governments are approaching these challenges that we have in common. Nonetheless, sorry. Let me start explaining. So next page, please. So Japan, the current status of the greenhouse gas emission in fiscal year 2019 is 1,212 million tons carbon dioxide equivalent. What this means is that since the in comparison to fiscal year 2018, that's like minus 2.9% reduction. And if we compare that to 2013, it's minus 14. And if we compare with 2005, it's minus 12.3. So for as a country in Japan, we have been seeing, or we have been successful in a way to reduce our emissions for the last 6 years consecutively. And we have an estimation of the fiscal year 2020 emission, where we expect a further reduction of GHG. But this is mainly or due to the COVID-19 restrictions. But nonetheless, we have been seeing a peak and now in the progress of reducing carbon dioxide and GHG emission. The reduction factors identified by the government is they identified two main reasons. One is the reduced energy consumption through improved energy conservation activities, and also through wider adoption of renewable energy. But on the other hand, we have an increase in hydrofluorocarbon emission, which is the substitute of ozone depleting substance. And this is actually going to be a problem for us because we are seeing an increase on this emission. In terms of law, we have an Act on Promotion of Global Warming Countermeasures, which was enacted in 1998. So around 30 years or so, around 23 years or so of experience of local government and national government working on reducing global warming or GHG emissions through this law. So this is the current status of Japan. Next slide, please. In terms of national and local commitment, we have been seeing quite a lot of progress in the last few years. And this is the graph that's explaining about that. First of all, our commitments towards zero carbon really kick-started from the IPCC special report that was announced in October 2018. As you may know, this IPCC special report clarified when and how fast the world needs to become carbon neutral to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. This really made a lot of our stakeholders to think what is needed for us to achieve this goal. And in the case of Japan, the local governments took a lead. First by Kyoto City, announced zero carbon by 2050 in the beginning of 2019. And then immediately after that, cities like Yokohama and Tokyo followed by announcing zero carbon by 2050. And in 2020, as you may recall, UNFCCC and the Climate Champions announced a Race to Zero campaign in June. And by that time, we had 91 local governments in Japan who have declared zero by 2050. And then we had COP26 a few weeks ago, and this number increased to 479 local governments in Japan. When we look at the national government commitment, which is in green triangle, so basically Japanese government had its own national determined contribution, which they set as a 26% reduction by 2030. And this didn't change in the beginning of 2020, but in the latter part of 2020, our national government announced to commit to net zero by 2050. This was immediately after Chinese government who have announced its reduction the goal to achieve zero carbon by 2060. And then it was followed by Korea. So really in East Asian context, this was a very concentrated timing where these national governments here in this region committed to net zero. In the context of Japan, national government have been following and supporting local government commitment by zero carbon by 2050. And this actually encouraged national government to also commit to zero carbon. And the national government also submitted its updated submission of NDCs leading up to COP26. And in this document, they've announced that by 2030, they will reduce by 46%, aiming also for 50% reduction. Next slide, please. So this is our current situation, but I'm introducing you the challenge that we are facing at the moment in connection to local governments. First of all, we have 1/3 of Japanese local governments, which is around 585 local governments, already have territorial mitigation plan. But these plans are revised every 5 to 10 years. This plan is part of the law that I've introduced you, which was enacted in 1998. So we have a long history of local governments creating mitigation plan. But one of the challenges that we are facing at the moment is how do we drastically and revise this in a timely manner to respond to the global understanding or scientific understanding that we have to further reduce our mitigation, our GHG emissions. And in that connection, our midterm target, as I informed you in the previous slide, it was only recent that the national government announced or officially submitted its NDC with its reduction of 46% by 2050. So now that this is officially out, the local governments in Japan are now trying to adjust their plans to reflect this national target. But again, because they already have a plan which is revised every 5 to 10 years, the question is, can these local governments revise this in a timely manner? Can they fasten the schedule? And also, can they actually really drastically raise their ambition, where we only have 8 more years up until 2030? And through these challenges, the current situation is that the collaboration with other stakeholders are required increasingly as a reduction target becomes more ambitious. What I mean here is that when the local governments are looking or doing a mitigation action, usually they tackle from individual project base where they have like a control of, but that doesn't actually solve the problem of achieving net zero, of course. So local governments now have to approach a bigger audience, bigger stakeholders, when they are looking towards reducing this reduction to zero. So in effect, the collaboration is something that is regarded as a most must-do activity if local governments are to achieve zero carbon emission. Next slide, please. So I'm introducing the approach taken by local governments in Japan. So I'm putting in the brackets general information about Japan itself. We have an urbanization rate which is around 92%, in comparison to Europe, which is around 75%. Forest coverage, it's around 68%, and in Europe, it's around 38%. So from this statistics, maybe you could understand that we have a very concentrated urban areas, and people are living in these urban areas. And then other parts of Japan are have a lot of forest resource. So naturally, cities have different characteristics. This is somewhat very apparent. Of course, cities have different geological situation and condition. But when we look at local government activities, initiatives globally, this tends to be forgotten. So I'm introducing this. And as an approach that our Japanese local government is taking is that by understanding the difference of characteristics city to city, we can consider how to best collaborate so that together we can achieve zero carbon. And also what is really important is that the society has to be sustainable and also resilient. So I'm introducing the map shown here on the right-hand side is the map of Japan. The red part, it's a renewable energy potential by municipality map, which was made by national government. So the blue part shows the high potential of renewable energy, and the red part shows low potential. So by government is showing these potential, then the local governments can actually work towards, okay, I understanding what is my characteristic and who should I partner with and work together so that I can achieve zero carbon. At the same time, for those who are in the rural area can actually use that as a benefit to collaborate with more, how do I say, economically, concentrated urban areas like Tokyo and Yokohama or Kyoto or Osaka. So through these collaboration, we believe that nationally we can achieve zero carbon. Next slide, please. The other approach that I would like to introduce is the multi-level and replicate approach. I'm writing here as ambition loop and decarbonization domino effect. As I've introduced to you in the previous slides, in the case of Japan, there's a strong collaboration between national and local governments when it comes to climate activities. What I'm introducing here is an example where national government established this council called the Council for National and Local Decarbonization. This was established in December 25th, 2020, almost immediately after national government declaring zero carbon commitment, which was in October the same year. So they've established this council where national ministers from different ministries and also local government leaders participated. And they've organized this council so that there was an understanding, in order to understand the needs of local government and what national governments can do to facilitate and support local governments to achieve zero carbon. So through these meetings, they formulated a regional decarbonization roadmap, which was announced in June 9th in 2021. And through these consultation and also meetings, they've came up with a concept of, which is shown in the diagram below, where they've identified that the next 5 year will be a critical 5 year to concentrate the government support to local government to create at least 100 model of decarbonized regions by 2050. And what they plan is that by creating 100 model by 2050, and then they would like to replicate this domestically to other parts of Japan to inflict and to speed up their activities on decarbonization. And the government, together with local governments, identified a number of activities that they could work on to support these activities. They've identified that local governments lack financial support, of course, but also human resource, and also the challenge of visualizing carbon emission was identified as well. So these were, how do I say, created and conducted through multi-level participation, and the concept came out. And so now we are in the process of implementation using this roadmap and activity. Now, next slide, please. So stakeholder engagement. Next slide, please. When we talk about stakeholder, of course, there are many stakeholders. And putting local government in the center, we have national government, communities, universities, researchers, NGOs, youth, for example, and private companies. But how we how do I say, do this stakeholder commitment is explained in the next slide. Next slide, please. So in the case of Japan, we try to capture climate change in a wider perspectives. The graph shown here is the planetary boundary, donut of the planetary boundary that many of you may have already seen somewhere. But climate change is only one aspect, one challenge that we see as human society for us to achieve sustainability. And of course, we have to have a strong social foundation where we have a society and economy that is thriving, but not breaking the ceiling of ecological ceiling, including climate change. And we need to address all of these issues, otherwise we will not achieve sustainability. Next slide, please. Therefore, in the case of Japan, we use SDGs as a tool where we discuss about the governance of the local government, as well as the improvement and also stakeholder engagement on how we could actually change our society and economy, the system, to be sustainable. Next slide, please. And with this particular frame so therefore, what I'm actually trying to say is that in the case of Japan, we use SDGs more and more for us to actually talk about climate change, and also for local governments to engage stakeholders to discuss climate change. And the climate change is not discussed independently, but more as a part of a bigger sustainability argument. And in that context, what I'm introducing you here in this slide is that we've been having a lot of SDGs activities supported by national government, and also where we have many local government and private companies who have been participating in this activity since 2015 onwards. And one example is this, in 2016, the government established SDGs promotion headquarters with Prime Minister as a chair and the Chief Cabinet Secretary and Foreign Minister as vice chairs. And all ministers are part of the members. And through these promotion headquarters, they've discussed what they can do. And one of the activities that they came out with is the Regional Revitalization Public-Private Cooperation Platform. We have a web page, and we have many members who are signing up for this particular platform. And as you can see from the title, it's public-private cooperation. And the current members are shown in the graph, and activities are a very wide ranging of activities where we have working groups, collaboration workshops, and knowledge accumulation and exchange. Thousands of different type of stakeholders.
이치다 소장님, 죄송한데요. 지금 시간이 너무 많이
Excuse
지나서요.
me.
1분 내지 2분 내로 좀
Unfortunately, we
진행해
are
주시면
way behind
감사하겠습니다.
our schedule. So
죄송합니다.
if possible, please try to finish your presentation within the next 1 minute.
Sure. Okay. So so through these activities, we have a very active stakeholder engagement here in Japan. And next slide, please. Other specific engagement. I'm introducing just youth, and also the final one is university and academics. So with the youth NGOs, this is something that's been growing recently in the area of climate change. And one example is that the local government are increasingly interested to engage youth in the argument of climate change, as it actually touches upon the future, direction of the city policy. So during the COP, we had this one session with youth. So we connected live from COP26, where Yokohama City youth and NGOs listened and asked questions to me, where I was participating in COP26, and then trying to get engaged with the discussion with youth. And also we have a lot of activities like youth video competition. My final page, next page, slide, please. We also engage with universities, academic institutions, and local governments. This is one example. We have 1.5 degree lifestyle study with IGES. What we do here is we engage citizens on understanding how the lifestyles might change or need to change in a world limiting the global temperature rise within 1.5 degree. This is to encourage and make people understand what the world would be if we are to achieve this goal. Because when we are all talking about commitments, but none of us really understands how the life will change. And this is this workshop will study and research, and workshop will actually help people to have clear idea, a little bit more clear idea about how the life might change and what is required for us to have this in terms of lifestyle. So these are some of the example, and we also have a lot of other activities. For example, Sapporo conducted citizens assembly on climate change. This is actually an activity that UK, I think, started on climate assembly. Sapporo City last year conducted this citizens assembly, and cities like Kawasaki is now also conducting such activities to have citizens engagement. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So we learned from his presentations that Japan has made a lot of effort to engage many multiple stakeholders and intercity cooperation for net zero, and what kind of activities are going on between the central government and also the local governments are going on were all touched upon in his presentation. And also he mentioned some policies to that end and multiple angles. As we are behind the schedule, I would like to make sure that the rest of two speakers keep the time. So please make sure your presentation should end within 15 minutes. The next presenter is from Gwangju, and he is Mr. Tae Kim, the Planning Director at Gwangju International Climate and Environment Center. He's going to talk about local governance for carbon neutrality. Are you ready? Please. Can you hear me well? Okay. Nice to meet you all. My name is Kim Tae-ho. I am the chief of the Net Zero R&D Bureau. We are a government-sponsored organization, which is affiliated, which was designed to support net zero activities in Gwangju. The 15 minutes is really short for me, I think, but I'll try my best to keep that time though. So rather than talking about the entire policies of net zero, I'm going to focus on a citizen engagement activities. So Gwangju's efforts for climate change responses and vision and strategy for net zero Gwangju 2045, which is 5 years earlier than 2050, and the governance for net zero and cases of citizen collaboration for net zero. Next slide. It was 2008 when the Gwangju Metropolitan City started its earnest effort to make it a net zero, and it has a target to reduce by 10% of greenhouse gas emissions. The themed project was Carbon Bank Initiative. That was first in Korea, and that became a model for the rest of the cities in Korea. Next. In the journey to the carbon net zero, data is very important. So as the first city in metropolitan government, International Climate and Environmental Center was established, and at the same time, urban assessment model system was established to release and respond to adaptation issues. For over the past 12 years, from 2008, over 50 million tons of emissions was reduced. And there are many new challenges, actually, that raised awareness Awareness was raised on transition to low-carbon society as correlation between pandemic and climate change becomes clear. And approximately 75.9% of citizens aware the need for climate change response, and 81.9% said they feel uncomfortable by fine dust, and 83.9% of citizens recognize that the heat wave are severe. Under this circumstance, the Gwangju Metropolitan City Government assessed the climate change initiatives and policies, and municipality government tried to be even faster than the central government in the journey to net zero. Last year, the citizen announced the climate crisis emergency actions, and also at the city council level, a special committee on Green New Deal was established. And also Net Zero City Implementation Group was established as well. The vision and strategy for Net Zero Gwangju 2045 is to lead the post-COVID-19 era. So it first would transform the city to climate changes, and also the green industry will be more fostered in Gwangju. I would focus on two aspects. Gwangju's project to induce AI to accomplish the Green New Deal is underway. And second, a citizen-initiated cooperative Green New Deal is also a focus of Gwangju Metropolitan City in the journey to net zero. Gwangju's net zero target will be accomplished by 2045. The total emission by 2045 will be reduced quite considerably. Next slide. The Gwangju Metropolitan City also made a major key policies in the sector of energy. By 2030, the corporate RE100 will be accomplished, and by 2045, Gwangju RE100 will be established, and also the old cars will be disposed. And from 2045, 100% environmentally friendly companies will be made. I mean, there should be a transformation of the current companies to 100% eco-friendly companies. And also by 2045, the park and green areas will be 10-minute walking distance by every neighborhood. And governance is very important for net zero as well. The mayor of the city government and the superintendent and head of the offices and civil society are all engaged in the implementation committee, and 114 activities group in civil society will join in this committee. And to enhance the result of the policies, the administrative vice mayor is heading the committee. And the governance is actually set by sectors, which is composed of concerned agencies, universities, and academic community, and heads of offices and other stakeholders. And at the same time, the The early 100 implementation committee is separately established and implemented. And citizen participation is also very important, and to that end, information should be fully provided to citizens. And we are providing a custom-made platform. And through the system, the emission data is available, and that is provided to citizens under the name of our neighborhood greenhouse center. And to provide information on the local communities, there'll be another platform or centers to be established by December. The single housing and commercial complexes will be provided incentives if they reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And under the policy of the net zero policy, about 56% of Gwangju's emission come from a building sector. And with that policy, 0.92 million tons of CO2 was reduced, and that's equivalent to 23 million trees. The greenhouse gas emission comes from building sector, like I said, and the 68% of Gwangju citizens lives in multi-residence units. Over the past decade, 430 apartment buildings participated in the low-carbon green apartment project. And voluntary reduction projects are also run. And the consulting services, education workshop, and the greenhouse gas emission consultings by households are all going well. And such activities are all supported by the government. And this is about the citizens' participation in energy transition. To make citizens to feel the change, this strategy makes sure that the government provides workshops to citizens. And this year, around 813 citizens participated in the training sessions, and they are ready for energy transition town, which is also known as net zero transition town. This year, out of five towns, town networks, by 2030, we will set 97 centers with the 5 base centers. And next slide. This is energy transition with the citizens. To make the citizens to feel the changes, we expect solar power generated by citizens. For the first time in Korea, Gwangju put a solar power plant in high school, and 274 kilowatt capacity of solar power was also established in an apartment roof. And also, it has a plan to establish 1 gigawatt capacity of solar power plant as well. And 20% of them will be initiated by our citizens. Next slide. So beyond Gwangju, the city itself, the government will strengthen the collaboration with other cities as well. And it launched the Gwangju Daegu RE100 Citizen Club. And this is a certification program and targeting 100,000 certifiers, the members of the certification clubs. Next slide. By 2040, Gwangju will be reborn as a net zero city. That's the target. Thank you for your listening, and I hope for your continued support. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for keeping the time. By 2045, you will have energy independence 100%. So there are a lot of citizen engagement programs that you're working on in the city of Gwangju. To induce public participation, I think providing information is really important, as you mentioned. So there is a greenhouse gas information center and greenhouse gas information platform are really impressive. At the same time, there are other things such as carbon credit and green apartment models, and energy transition, village hubs, and citizen-led PV cooperatives are some of the things that should be replicated in other cities in Korea. Thank you once again very much for your presentation. Finally, the last presentation of today's session. The presenter is Ms. Oh Yu-kyung, Operations Officer of CityNet. She will talk about city cooperation projects on sustainable urbanism. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Ms. Song, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, great. My name is Yu Kyung-oh, and I am an operations officer at CityNet Secretariat. First and foremost, I'd like to express that I'm very grateful about today's opportunity. I hope everybody will enjoy my presentation. Today, I'm here to share about one of our ongoing intercity cooperation projects on sustainable urbanism that we began this year, International Urban and Regional Cooperation, in short, IRC. Since my time is limited, I will make my presentation short and sweet. Next slide, please. Before I share about this project, let me first take this opportunity to briefly tell you about CityNet. CityNet is a network of cities in the Asia-Pacific region established for the implementation of sustainable urbanism. We were established with support from UNESCOP, UN Habitat, and UNDP in 1987. As of this year, we have in total 173 members, including cities and NGOs, mainly from these three regions. Next slide, please. In order to achieve sustainable urbanism, we work by providing capacity building workshops and platforms to share and exchange knowledge on urban best practices. For capacity building workshops, we mainly focus on 4 thematic areas, which are climate change, disaster, infrastructure, and sustainable development goals. We often work together with training partners to run capacity building workshops, such as the ones listed here. CityNet also runs the online platform known as the Urban SDG Knowledge Platform, which is a repository of best practices that encourage knowledge sharing between cities. The platform was established by CityNet, Seoul Metropolitan Government, and UNESCO. Government officials can directly upload their urban policies on the platform for their for other government officials. Currently, we have over 350 cases on the platform, so I highly encourage all of you to visit this wonderful website. Next slide, please. That was a short introduction to CityNet. I hope you have a better picture of who we are and what we do. Now, please allow me to introduce you the project concept of the IRC program. As you are all aware, climate change in cities has arisen as one of the most serious global issues. About 57% of the world's population currently resides in cities, and the density of urban populations contributes to the direct experience of climate change effects. Although cities are the centers, they are also the key actors in resolving this environmental issue. As cities are at the forefront of climate change adaptation, mitigation, and the rapid urbanization, we believe that building concrete cooperation and partnership between cities across the world is very important. The cities are already experiencing frequent heat waves, flooding, and torrential rains caused by climate change. Considering these climate changes are affecting the population in marginalized informal settlements the hardest, there is no doubt that this is a global urgent matter. In light of this, IRC has paired up EU and non-EU cities to generate concrete long-term relationship between cities and conducted cross-country thematic webinars where the cities can share their knowledge regarding sustainable urbanism. Next slide, please. At this point, I believe many of you might be wondering what IRC is. Next slide, please. IRC stands for International Urban and Regional Cooperation. This is a project of the European Union promoting multi-city cooperation on sustainable development and building partnerships between EU and non-EU cities. This project is the second phase of the International Urban Cooperation, which is IUC project, which was implemented from 2017 to 2020. Next slide, please. CITES also helped coordinate Korean cities for the World Cities project, which streamed into the IUC project. So I also would like to share a brief overview. From the Republic of Korea, Seoul, Busan, Gwangju, and Suwon participated, along with Eindhoven from Netherlands, Barcelona from Spain, Tampere from Finland, and Scottish Cities Alliance from UK. Seoul and Eindhoven cooperated on public lighting and e-governance, and Suwon and SCA exchanged their knowledge on the development of circular economy and hydrogen vehicles. Overall, this IUC project vitalized city communications and accelerated the knowledge sharing regarding sustainable development goals. The most interesting part is that this project also invigorated the economy in cities by giving opportunities to private companies to cooperate with cities from abroad. Next slide, please. IRC is being implemented in the geographical areas of Asia and Australasia, Latin America, China, North America, and Europe. And this project involves thematic cluster events and trainings, city-to-city and multi-city study visits, thematic and best practices reports, and networking events in Europe and the region. The project facilitates knowledge exchange through a combination of online tools and face-to-face support, such as study visits, participation in thematic and networking events, or capacity building workshops. In order to maximize the efficient communication between cities in similar interests, IRC suggests two types of peerings, which are one-on-one peerings and cluster peerings. Under one-on-one peerings, selected EU cities and regions matched with non-EU cities, and regions in similar challenges and interests. Cluster pairing is a group of peerings share similar challenges and topics of cooperation within the same geographical area. Next slide, please. IRC is mainly focusing on these three big topics. First, ecological transition and Green Deal. Second topic is urban and regional renewal and social cohesion. And third topic is innovative, sustainable, and carbon neutral ecosystem. Next slide, please. Throughout the regions and cities, there are three big cross-cutting challenges that everybody is experiencing, which are digital transition and smart city, post-COVID recovery, and energy transition and climate change. The three main topics mentioned earlier are set to tackle down these three cross-cutting challenges. Next slide, please. Since CITES is currently working as a country coordinator between Korean cities and European cities, I'd like to talk more about the city pairings between Korean and European cities. First, there are three Korean cities who are participating in this project, Seoul, Busan, and Sejong, as you can see from the presentation slide. Seoul is paired up with Dublin from Ireland, Busan is paired up with Rotterdam from Netherlands, and Sejong is paired up with Sofia from Bulgaria. Although these pairings are established as one-on-one pairings, they are open pairings and have room to explore connections outside of the established pairings. Even though Dublin is paired up with Seoul, Dublin can discuss further cooperation with Busan and Sejong as well, if they share similar interests on specific topics. Actually, Rotterdam is paired up with Busan, but is also currently communicating with Seoul and Sejong as well regarding green mobility as well. So these paired cities communicate through bilateral meetings and quarterly meetings. And even further, the cities can share their knowledge and best practices and learn from the others through participating in thematic cluster webinars every month. When it comes to city pairings, we are trying to open the pairings as much as possible so that the cities can maximize their engagement with cities. Next slide, please. These are the lovely pictures from online meetings and thematic cluster webinars. As you can see, we have been conducting meetings through online and it has been challenging but very successful. Next slide, please. Now, I'd like to talk more about the challenges of this project. As you can guess, conducting city-to-city cooperation project during the pandemic has not been very easy. Especially in Asian culture, meeting in person and establishing trust is a very important element to successfully carry out the project. Therefore, we have been trying to hold frequent meetings and events so that we can keep them in the loop and keep allowing them to generate continuous conversation. Also, one another challenge is building long-term relationships between cities. Some cities consider this project as a one-time event, and therefore it's difficult to maintain the communication between cities after the end of the project. So IRC provide funds for cities to implement sustainable pilot projects for cities, which will encourage cities to have continuous dialogues. Next slide, please. As I mentioned earlier, IRC is an ongoing project. Therefore, I'd like to briefly talk to you about the timeline of this project and what do we expect to build throughout the project. Next slide, please. This project will be completed in 2023. Since the city selections and city matchings are done now, throughout the rest of the year, we will conduct thematic webinars with selected cities. And next year, there will be 2 site visits, both in Europe and Korea. After the site visit, we're expecting cities to implement pilot projects in cities by 2023. Next slide, please. Throughout the IRC project, we are not only trying to build up the relationship between EU and non-EU cities, but also establish quadruple helix cooperation. By connecting cities and encouraging them to cooperate on pilot projects, they will be able to involve civil society, research institutions, private companies, and local authorities to work together. Next slide, please. This was the end of my presentation today, and thank you for your attention. If you're interested in this ongoing project,
네, 수고
please feel free.
많으셨습니다.
감사합니다. Thank you, everybody.
네, 감사합니다.
Thank you very much for your presentation. So there are questions about IURC projects. Please contact the representative of City naturally to get the answers for your questions. So you're supporting city-to-city cooperation and you're also supporting the city projects to have the low carbon transition. We're already behind our schedule, so unfortunately, we won't have time for a Q&A session. So it's time to wrap up. If you have any questions about the speakers, please contact them directly through their email, or you can send your questions to UNSCAP so that we can deliver the question to the speakers. Through these 5 presentations, we were able to learn a lot of projects that have been conducted by cities in Korea, Japan, and China to support the low carbon transition of cities. There are a lot of programs where our citizens can participate, and we were able to get a lot of ideas on what we can do going forward. And through city-to-city cooperation, we can share our experiences, and that will enable us to successfully implement our own respective policies. I hope that this session was useful in other local governments in their efforts to attract more citizens' participation for their low-carbon initiatives. With that, we'll wrap up today's session. Once again, thank you very much for your presentation. Once again, thank you very much. I'd like to also thank all the participants for their kind contribution to this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Son, for the moderation and time management, and also appreciate to all the panelists in our last session. With this, I would like to introduce Mr. Sang-Min Nam, Deputy Head of ASCAP East and Northeast Asia Office, for his concluding remarks for the forum. Sang-Min, you have the floor.
Thank you, all the distinguished speakers and participants, for your for participation during last 2 days. During last actually it was 7 hours. We had 24 presentations from cities, research institutions, international organizations, and also city networks. With a limited time, it is too hard for everybody to digest this various information and the various data and analysis and information of activities. So this International Forum on Low Carbon City, this is a collaborative program of ASCAP, Incheon City, ICLEI, GCF, and IGDP. This is the first forum. So there are we already received suggestions and questions on whether we are going to hold it next year. Yes, we are going to make it as an annual event. We are hoping to make it as an in-person meeting from 2022. So also we have received questions, very in-depth questions. So this raises another question to us: how to make this forum informative and effective. So effective platform for knowledge sharing. So we will have a serious homework how to make it effective, and we will make announcement early next year, hopefully, and then try to invite speakers and also participants as many as possible. So please stay with us and see you next year. Thank you.